Jeffrey Epstein's private calendar reveals prominent names, including CIA chief Goldman's top lawyer. That CIA chief would be the current CIA director, William Burns. Had 3 meetings scheduled with Epstein in 2014 when he was Deputy Secretary of State, Joe Obama, term 2. They first met in Washington, then Burns visited Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan. Allegedly, this was because Burns was told Epstein was some sort of financial services whiz, and he wanted to get his advice and counsel about transitioning to the private sector after his tour as Deputy Secretary of State. Catherine Rumler was White House counsel under Obama, Joe Obama, terms 1 and 2. Dozens of meetings with Epstein in the years after her White House service before she became a top lawyer at Goldman Sachs. He also planned for her to join a 2015 trip to Paris and a 2017 visit to his private island in the Caribbean.
And you know what happens there on the private island.
Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College, invited Epstein, who brought a group of young female guests to campus. Noam Chomsky, anarcho-syndicalist professor of renown, scheduled to fly with Epstein to have dinner at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2015. None of their names appear in Epstein's now public black book of contacts or in the public flight logs of passengers who traveled on his private jet. The documents show Epstein arranged multiple meetings with each of them, just remembering the timeline here, after he had served jail time in 2008 for a sex crime involving a teenage girl and was a registered sex offender. The documents include thousands of pages of emails and schedules from 2013 to 2017 that have not been previously reported. They don't reveal the purpose of most of the meetings, and the Journal could not verify whether every scheduled meeting actually took place, but you did get comments from the likes of CIA Director Burns and Goldman Sachs counsel Catherine Rumler, both of the Joe Obama White Houses, that this was professional in nature. They had no relationship. I regret meeting with him. I regret ever knowing him. All of the distancing you expect from people with positions of status that don't want to get sullied by association with Jeffrey Epstein. Now they don't, of course. Yeah. So is this the beginning of the unraveling of Epstein, since it's been so, and all of his relationships? Because one of the assertions is that Epstein and his relationship with Rumler, the White House counsel under President Obama, then top lawyer at Goldman Sachs, he was suggesting he could broker business for her representing the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Oh, Bill Gates, he is on the private logs, the flight logs. He has been made public.
Yep.
And Melinda Gates, since their unceremonious divorce, has not said anything explicit, but she sort of insinuated less than redeeming conduct by her now ex-husband. You'll have to ask him about that when asked about Bill's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You'll have to ask him about that. Speaking of distancing. This seems to me particularly important because I know there are any number of conspiracy theories that swirl around Jeffrey Epstein, his demise, his relationships, what happened on that island, and with whom it happened. But these relationships, I would think, would be cause for concern, including from a national security perspective. Are there people, including the current director of the CIA, who are in some ways compromised? I'm saying I don't know, but these revelations require some questions be asked and answered, don't you think? For more on this and other geopolitical and national security matters, please be joined by Dakota Wood. He served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He's a senior research fellow for defense programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota Wood, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's great to start the week with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, pleasure. So your reaction to these revelations of relationships between Jeffrey Epstein and people at the upper reaches of presidential administrations?
Well, I think it just confirms what everybody already knows, or at least suspects, that once you either have lots of money or you're in positions of power, that those circles attract each other, right? So you or I wouldn't be invited to get on a private jet, go to some, Caribbean island because we're not flush with cash or in a position to arrange meetings with others that the other person wouldn't be able to get to. You want to meet the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, or you want to meet, whomever, right? So these are tight circles, and once you're part of that glitterati, ivory towered academia sort of group, they eat together, they have cocktails together, they travel together, and you can get access with power, wealth, and influence. We just kind of know that. So this revelation out of his diaries, the black books, and calendars and all that, just really confirms that. And I think what it calls upon all of us to do, and especially if you're, wanting to achieve some kind of high position, appointed or otherwise, is you really have to be careful with the people that you associate with, right? But there is this seductive allure. There's a little bit of danger or excitement, that attracts people to do stupid things, and then they find themselves in the crosshairs, and now they're trying to make excuses. So it's what we see all the time.
Well, yeah, except or it could be in this case you're a pedophile. I mean, to put not too fine a point on it,
Sure.
and I mean you have
absolutely right.
Ghislaine Maxwell we've got a 20-year sentence and she won't talk,
Yeah.
which is interesting in and of itself. And then these powerful people that, we've known something about them, but we still don't really have a handle on it. And despite the accusations by a number of the young women who were apparently were exploited by Epstein and Maxwell, and now these other names from the political and policy world. I mean, a CIA director, a current CIA director. They tell us more about what you knew, what you suspected. The power, the rich attract the powerful, and vice versa. But now you're talking about a criminal, a human trafficking ring, and potentially people in government that are compromised or culpable or both.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, you're right on the specific issues, but it's how do we get to these points? A lot of these political appointees, rarely do they have deep expertise in the areas to which they've been assigned. So, an individual, this guy is currently director of the CIA, but what was his actual background? And again, you go back to these networks of who knows who and favoritism. Are you personally loyal? Were you a major campaign donor and all that? And you get into these situations where, these associations with a known pedophile, et cetera, right, can really compromise, and these are points you've already made, your ability to make good decisions and to be influential, right? So if we've got issues with Russia or China or Iran, and your top people are feeding you intelligence and other sorts of things along those lines, can you really trust that? What does it talk about the morality or the principles or the values conveyed by these people? Can it be used for blackmail? Well, perhaps. I mean, we're kind of speculating now, but it would seem reasonable that people would be circumspect or less willing to be forthcoming on analysis if it would get them crossways with somebody who could reveal even additional, information, like, these allegations about Bill Gates. I mean, there's been stuff written in the past about his younger days when he was really a womanizer, according to some of these writings, right? And yet, because you have money, wealth, power, and influence, et cetera, it's a different set of rules for these folks. How many of us could do things and not get crosswise with the IRS, for example, right, or the Department of Justice, that other people get away with all the time? We're seeing that with these January 6th hearings, and no penalties for people who were rioting through our cities in Portland and Minneapolis and other places, Chicago, snatch and grab from, the local bodega, right? No problems at all, and yet you do something on the conservative side of the spectrum that might be stupid as well, and you're hammered, right, with federal law. So I think it's an issue again of people allowing themselves to be compromised, and then they're in positions of power, and you really have to question the wisdom and their the efficacy of their judgments today.
So the CIA spokesperson claimed that Burns met with Epstein because he wanted to leave his current government position. Are we ever going to really know exactly what happened? Will there be a day of reckoning, or is this just going to be a headline today and then swept under the rug?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what we see on a regular basis. It's only shows like yours that actually bring this stuff out into the public view. But if you look at, the normal media coverage, and certainly White House spokesperson and spokesperson out of the Pentagon and others, it seems they do a lot of scrambling and double talking to cover these sorts of things up. So we all want days of reckoning. We all want justice, and fairness, just general fairness. To be applied, and what we see is the exact opposite from people who are in positions to modify records, to hide information, to be, again, double talking, making excuses on why things happen. So truth eventually does come to light. Usually it's far later than most of us would want, right? But it only comes about through kind of a relentless pursuit of it, right? So these hearings in Congress are important. Your shows are important, bringing this stuff out. And then it has to motivate the average voter to do something about that. I mean, do you return people to elected office who have a track record of making very, very bad decisions? Or because they're maybe giving you something like subsidies with health care or student loans or whatever, if for your own reasons you want to keep them in office, right? So ultimately, power comes from the bottom up in our system. The sad part is people don't leverage that power, getting out to vote and bringing pressure on their elected representatives and government officials to change behavior.
I wanted to get your take on where things stand with Ukraine. There's this ongoing talk of a May-June counteroffensive to push out Russian troops that control about a fifth of the country at present.
Right.
Is this, number one, do you think it happens and on that timeline? And number two, is this make or break for Ukraine actually repelling the Russians versus having to sit down at the table?
Well, it has to happen because a lot of governments are suffering from what we would call war fatigue. This thing is stretched on for a year. It could have been resolved in 2 months if the West and the United States have been much more aggressive in providing the resources that Ukraine needs to actually defend itself. But it was all trickled out, right? So just enough to keep the Ukrainians from losing, but not enough to actually enable them to win. And so over the many months that followed, you give them a little bit more. It keeps them in survival mode, from actually losing, but not enough to win. Well, after 6 or 8 or 10 months of this, people just get tired of the continued requests, and in part it's the fault of these governments, especially in Germany and France and those in Europe, to have not done what they should have done. So this spring offensive everybody is waiting on, the Ukrainians aren't going to announce that because that loses the element of surprise, right? But they have to do something to show that all this support for the past year is actually amounting to something, right? So they're really caught in a moment where even if they don't have everything they need, they have to move, and everybody's expecting that. Whether it's decisive or not remains to be seen. A lot of people have been, killed and lost due to battlefield injuries, over 250,000 on Russia's side, over 100,000 on the Ukrainian side. The Russians can tolerate more losses than Ukrainians can. But General Cavoli, who's our senior U.S. guy in Europe, says that the Russians have more people in Ukraine today than they did in the invasion a year ago. All right, so more people, and they have another 500,000 waiting in the wings. So it's going to come down to battlefield competence, whether the Ukrainians are able to leverage the material, the strike capabilities they do have effectively. But in the last 3 or 4 months, the Russians have really hardened their defenses. Digging in, trench lines stretching hundreds of miles, artillery stocks that have been put in place and all that. So it's just a huge unknown. The Ukrainians will have to move probably within the next several weeks, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
He is Dakota Wood. He served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He is the Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota Wood, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Quote based on healthy, non-smoking 30-year-old female with a 20-year term policy. Rates may vary. Eligible policies and estate planning tools can vary by state.
It's a busy life. You have enough to worry about. So here's a great way to check life insurance off your list. It's called Ethos. With the thought of medical exams, forms to fill out, and the cost, it's easy to see why life insurance can fall to the bottom of your to-do list. But at Ethos Life, we've got your back. For about $1 a day, you could get $250,000 in term life insurance without a medical exam. Just go online, answer a few health questions, and snap! Family protected. You could get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and be covered in hours. No medical exams, no blood tests, no hassle. Right now, with your purchase of an eligible policy from Ethos, you'll